Who was Stanislav Stankiewicz? He was a Belarusian who received secret orders from the German SS to kill every Jew in his county.
In order to save ammunition, they had the Jews lie on top of each other in 2 rows, and they shot through the bodies. The blood seeped up through the sand at the end of the day, and the ground was still quivering. So they had to post guards on top of the graves until everyone had suffocated. The worst part wasn't found out until after the war, when Soviet doctors conducted autopsies. They could find no bullet wounds on any of the infants. Apparently, the Belarusian police decided that the babies were too small to climb out of the grave, and so they wouldn't waste a bullet on them. They were buried alive.
And this was done under the command of Stanislav Stankiewicz.
That's correct.
Now, we've heard tales, God help us, like this before. Question, what happened to Stanislav Stankiewicz?
He was recruited by American intelligence, given a good job with Radio Liberty, and became a citizen of the United States.
In 1948, in a displaced persons camp in Germany, Stankiewicz was apprehended by U.S. Army counterintelligence. After investigating his background, the U.S. Army concluded
that Stankiewicz is a security risk to the United States because he worked first for the Soviets, then for the Nazis, and then the Soviets again. And he will work for anyone who pays him.
But rather than prosecute him, U.S. military intelligence recruited Stankiewicz as an informant and as a propagandist in America's Cold War effort against the Soviets. Stankiewicz was smuggled into America, and he moved into this quiet Queens, New York neighborhood where he lived in relative obscurity for over 20 years until John Loftus began his investigation.
We had prepared a case against Stankiewicz containing his confessions, his admissions of Nazi background, and were ready to prosecute.
As a last step, the Justice Department asked their Soviet counterparts to provide some eyewitnesses for the case.
We received a cable from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Soviet Union that Stanislav Stankiewicz had just died.
Well, he died in the United States?
And the Soviet government knew about it almost immediately.
This is a man brought into the United States to work for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
The security clearance would have been done by the agency in those days. So
by CIA?
By CIA, indeed.
You had another man who worked here, Vilis Hasners?
Yes.
The Immigration and Naturalization Service tried to deport Mr. Hasners, correct?
That's correct.
Failed, correct?
Yes.
Did you read the record against Hasners, the witnesses who testified?
Yes. Yes, we did.
And you know that among other things, here is one thing said about Hasners. One of the witnesses testified that on another occasion in July of 1941, he saw the respondent, Hasners, and other Latvians force a number of Jews into a synagogue, which they then set on fire. Does he still work for Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe?
I believe he still contributes, or he now again contributes, freelance programs, yes.
The Justice Department told us they had botched the case against Hasners. Mr. Hasners would not talk to us, on or off camera. But Anton Adamovich, currently a staff writer for Radio Liberty, agreed to. We read Mr. Adamovich some of the information the Justice Department had gathered on him.
You were a propagandist for the Nazis. Then you became an informer for the U.S. Army.
Yes.
Intelligence.
Yes.
And then it was as a result of that that you were brought into the United States.
Yes. That's
okay.
Generally that's right. Yes.
That's correct.
And
you know that both President Roosevelt and President Truman said that Nazi collaborators
yes, I knew.
Were not supposed to come into the United States.
I knew.
So that you knew that you came into the United States illegally.
Yes.
You knew that?
No, I came legally and I told everything about my background when I was admitted to USA.
To the FBI?
Yeah, of course.
And the FBI said?
And FBI said, all right, we knew this. And
we knew you were a Nazi collaborator.
Yes, and it's...
We knew that you helped
yes,
Army intelligence.
Yeah.
We'll reward you in spite of the fact that you were a Nazi collaborator.
Yeah, that's right. We had no choice. Yes, we had... We could be only collaborates with Soviet, with Bolsheviks, which we hate. 7 years I was persecuted by Bolsheviks.
Right.
Yes. or with these Nazis.
Dr. Witold Tumasz, who lives in this house in the Bronx, also made that choice and had his past history kept secret by U.S. intelligence services. Tumasz was for 3 months the Nazi-appointed mayor of Minsk, the capital of Byelorussia during World War II. On several occasions, we tried to talk with Dr. Tumasz about his reported role in recruiting the local police force, which massacred 45,000 persons. But he refused to appear on camera.
You let us into your home, and then you say you were unwilling to talk about these allegations.
I'm sorry, I did not talk. I cannot talk.
Off camera, he admitted he was indeed the Nazi mayor of Minsk, but he denied having anything to do with the extermination of Jews. By the late 1970s, with stories continuing to surface about Nazi war criminals in the United States, a House Congressional Committee chaired by then-Congressman Joshua Eilberg requested files on 111 alleged Nazi war criminals living in America. Among those on the list were 2 Belarusians, Franz Kuschel and Emanuel Jasiuk.
In 1978, Congress specifically asked the General Accounting Office to get information on these 2 people. The General Accounting Office asked the Army about it, and they were lied to. The Army simply lied to the General Accounting Office in 1978 and said, we don't have files on these people. They had the files.
The Army sent a letter through channels to Congressman Eilberg stating that they had searched certain very specific vaults for all files pertaining to Kuschel and had found no others. That information was a lie. I went down to the identical vaults and retrieved the Army intelligence files for Kuschel. 1 year later, after Eilberg had been told that no such files existed.
What would be the motive of the Army to lie?
If Congress had been given either the Kuschel or the Jasiuk dossiers, it would have inevitably unraveled the entire smuggling operation. The information had to be suppressed at all costs.
In 1978, the Congress was finally trying to get to the bottom of the Nazi connection. On behalf of Congress, John Tipton, a GAO investigator, requested all intelligence files on alleged Nazis living in America. After a careful review, he wrote this report for the GAO entitled, Widespread Conspiracy to Obstruct Probes of Alleged Nazi War Criminals Not Supported by Available Evidence. But now Tipton says that apparently he didn't get all the available evidence. We then showed Mr. Tipton a note that had been inserted into the file he requested. Defense material not cleared for review by GAO. Do not disclose to GAO until notified to do so.
So the Department of Defense was covering up material that the Congress asked for concerning Nazi war criminals and their admission into the United States.
Unless there's another reason for it.
We then read to Mr. Tipton from the FBI file on Emanuel Jasiuk, another file he had been told did not exist.
Subject, name of the man that we're talking about, who was allegedly a war criminal and caused deaths of people in Poland, now resides, gives his address, Passaic, New Jersey. Were you informed about all that when you asked about that in 1978?
I was not aware of that aspect of it.
That information was in the hands not just of the Defense Department, but of the FBI at the time you asked for it.
It appears to be that way. That, I think, is the first time I've seen that document.
And there can be little doubt from this document and from Defense Department documents that they lied to you and said they had nothing on this individual.
That seems to be the case.
So the Congress was misled back in 1978.
That's correct. From the information that John Loftus has showed to me and you showed me here today, I would have to say that that appeared so.
Here in the top secret vaults in Maryland, John Loftus discovered how the Army had been able to keep the Nazi smuggling operation secret for so long a time.
They routinely were deleting all documents showing that the government had assisted their entry. And I caught them at it. We went down and confronted the Army officials, and they said that they thought that we knew all about the sanitizing program. Apparently it's a routine procedure with them. And the procedure was established many years ago, and they were just following routine orders. And for one day, I was allowed to look through the dossiers with no deletions And of the 10 dossiers I looked at, 3 had letters evidencing government assistance in entering the United States.
And these 3 were Belarusian war criminals.
2 were Belarusian, and the 3rd was Hans Felfer, the Soviet spy working in the German intelligence service. He had been assisted in coming to the United States.
These people had a mission, which was to defeat the Soviet empire in Eastern Europe, a very admirable mission, one that was clearly in our national interest. The trouble was that they went out and did it on their own with no weighing of consequences, with no sense of what harm they might be doing to other interests, to our moral fiber. I don't impugn Wisner's motives, but his operation almost from start to finish, as documented here, was a disaster for the United States.
But it is a disaster that might still be continuing. Loftus had yet another example of a mass murderer coming to the United States. Because the information is still classified, he cannot reveal the subject's name.
Are criminals, are undesirables in the context of which we're speaking still being brought in today?
The person whose file I read, there was substantial evidence that he had persecuted hundreds of thousands of civilians.
And he was brought in how recently?
Recently.
And he was brought in because?
He had been working for OPC.
Way back then?
That's correct.
Someplace along the line, I get the feeling that you got rather frustrated by your experience in Washington at the Office of Special Investigations and inside the Department of Justice.
Very much so. Federal judges are extremely reluctant to strip someone of his citizenship unless there's an actual proof of murder, of blood on their hands. Did you ever try and prove a murder trial 30 years after the fact with all the witnesses behind the Iron Curtain and none of that evidence available to you? The most infuriating part was that these people had confessed over and over again to the intelligence agencies. We had all the information on their war crimes and their atrocities, and we couldn't use one piece of that material in court. It didn't comply with the rules of evidence.
Was there the desire to do the job? I mean, the fact of the matter is that this has gone on for 35 years, and nobody until this moment has had the desire to tell the story.
The Office of Special Investigations bent over backwards to spare as much staff and money and resources as they could.
I get the impression that nobody really wants to handle this. Why have you gone public?
Wouldn't you? We have to let it be known that we will never allow people who kill babies to go free, no matter how long it takes us, or how well they hide, no matter how well connected they are. Someday, the truth is going to come out. There is no statute of limitations for mass murder. And sooner or later, someone like me or someone else will come along and find out the truth.
A couple of footnotes. Richard Nixon's office said that he would have no comment on his knowledge of what we have reported, and the FBI told us that due to the classified nature of the information we've detailed, they too would not comment.